Okay, and hello, good afternoon. Jim Dimanis here from Rock Apartment Advisors. I trust everybody is keeping cool on this very, very warm day. Today's webinar is all about rents, how we manage, maximize, and of course, how we collect those rents. When you consider today's weather, I was almost thinking doing a last-minute change on the panel and just talking about air conditioning. But probably not a good thing to do when we've got some incredible specialists on the line. And so what I'd like to do is introduce our special guests today. First of all, we've got Derek Lobo. Derek, good afternoon.
Good day, Jim. Good to be here, and thank you for taking this job over from me. I did about 1 year of these webinars, and you're doing a terrific job. Thank you.
Yeah, well, now I know what Pierce Morgan felt like when he took over from Larry King. Yeah. As well, on the line, we've got Joe Hoffer, who is a lawyer with Cohen Highly. Hello, Joe. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Jim, and I will be talking about air conditioning during my segment.
Well, that's great. I mean, perfect. Very good. And, of course, we've got Surana Baptiste on the phone from Collections Canada. Thank you for joining us, Surana.
You're welcome.
Well, just going to move right along here. Derek obviously is the COO of Rock Advisors. He is a guru in the apartment industry, and I'm certainly very fortunate to be working with Derek and for Rock. Derek, I've just got this phenomenal photograph of you here on the screen, and that's your lovely wife, Celia. Where are you?
Well, you know, that was a couple of weeks ago. We took one of those cruises up to Alaska. And it was sort of a floating buffet, I called it. You know, the more you ate, the cheaper the cruise got. But this is in a place called Glacier Bay Provincial Park. If you've ever been to Lake Louise, which probably a lot of you have, imagine that 20 times. You know what I mean? Just the ship pulls into this beautiful, just kind of sound, and there's an iceberg there not iceberg, an ice field. And those are little icebergs that are sort of falling off it in the summer, and there's seals in the water, and there's golden eagles. They're really, really, really beautiful scene. So, anyway, so yeah, so that was just my wife and I on a little 1 week jaunt up.
Oh,
up
well,
Alaska.
that looks just spectacular.
Pristine. It's
yeah.
pristine. You sort of forget sometimes what fresh air is like.
Yeah.
Anyways, Jim, I'm happy to sort of come on this session and talk about rental, setting rents, right?
Right.
And we've always done feasibility studies for new apartment construction, right? So we answer, should you build, what should you build, how much can you charge, what's the depth of the market? But today I want to talk about just, you're an apartment owner and you want to maximize your rent. Once you collect those rents and you want to make sure they're legal and then you want to protect them. So I'm going to do the first part here in how to determine, the best rent that, the best rent that the marketplace is going to allow you to charge. Joe, are you going to talk briefly about vacancy decontrol later on?
Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
yes,
good,
a little bit.
Okay,
yeah.
so anyway, so we pretty much have to some extent now a little bit more of a free market than we've been used to, so you can set rents however you want. So let's just say you've got an apartment building. I'm going to pick the city of Oakville for argument's sakes, and say you've got a 30-suiter, and there are probably around 22 buildings in Oakville that are between 20 and 40 units, and they're of similar type structure. So what you want to do is really go visit all of those, okay? And in the apartment business, everything's not the same. It's a little bit more like figure skating. You got to judge them by the attributes. So these are the attributes you should look at judging an apartment building on: the superintendent, the curb appeal, the lobby, the common area, the apartment appeal, the location, security, parking, amenities. And a real simple way to do it is just to rank it. So if there are 22 buildings here, you give the score between 1 and 22. So if you go out and do a survey and you say, building 1 has the best curb appeal, give it a score of 22. If building 7 has the worst curb appeal, give it a score of 1. So it's a relative ranking that you're going to give it. You with me, Jim?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this looks like a mystery shop that Dalla would do.
Well, sort of, except here we're evaluating the building, not the person going into the building. Right? Not the superintendent. But to some extent, you're right. We do evaluate the superintendent. But anyway, so we just score each of these attributes, 1 through 22 based on number of buildings, then we add up the score, and our gut tells us this is a pretty accurate way of doing it. So the building with the highest score is the best building, right?
Right.
So now, but we haven't talked about price yet. We just ranked the buildings 1 through 22. So then we want to take the price, and here we just sort of made up some prices for one-bedroom apartments, and we want to adjust for parking and utilities, so we're comparing apples to apples. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've now ranked the buildings by quality, and now we put a notionalized rent to it. So if you go to the next slide, And this is where it gets interesting now. So what we do is we color each building. So here there's 21 buildings. They've all got different colors. So on the left-hand side are the one-bedroom rents ranked by quality. So the green building on the left-hand side, our surveyor ranked as the best building, right? And the worst building is the yellow building on the right-hand side, okay? And then and these go from best to worst. Now, if I sent out a surveyor on a different day, maybe building 1 would be building 2, and building 2 would be building 1, right?
Right.
And maybe building 20 would be 21 and 22, and so on. But building 1 building 1 isn't going to be 21, and building 21 isn't going to be 1. Everybody agree?
Absolutely.
It's just a quality kind of ranking. So in a perfect world, you would expect the rents to follow along that line. You would expect the green building to have the highest rent, and the blue building to have the second highest rent, and the red building to have the third highest rent, and the yellow building to have the lowest rent. Wouldn't you, all things being equal? But that's not the way it is, okay? So now if you look over at the right-hand side, we've actually plotted the rent on a relative basis, okay? And if this were a perfect world, those rents would follow the red line drawn there, but they don't, right? And that's the opportunity you have as a landlord, okay? So let's just say then all three of you can participate on this, okay? Let's say I'm a broker. You come to Rock and you say, no, I'd love to buy a building in Oakville, and I'd like you to put in some unsolicited offers for me on some buildings, and let's see if the owner wants to sell, right? If you had a choice of buildings to buy, all things being equal, which one would you want to buy? Pop quiz. Let's see how smart the crew is today.
Well,
Joe,
I'd want to buy
Surana?
the ones that are well below that line.
There you go. So that might be building number, so you see the ones with the arrows there on them?
Yeah, the ones with
Would
the
you want to buy
down
those?
arrows.
Would you want to buy
Yes.
those? Yes.
Yep.
Why? Because as soon as you buy those, when there's turnover, you could probably raise the rent pretty much up to that red line, right? So that's latent value sitting there for rent, right? Okay.
That's the expectation from this, yes.
Right. Okay, and this is real data, by the way, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So now, if there was a building you'd be worried about buying, which one would you be worried about buying? There's one that stands out in particular.
That purple one in.
Yeah, there you go, the purple one, because the purple guy seems to be getting rents above what the market's telling him he can get. So maybe he's done a couple of things here, because we ranked the quality, right? We looked at the lobby, the curb appeal, and all that stuff. Maybe he's taking a lot of roommates. Maybe he's not taking last month's deposit. Maybe he's dropped his acceptance criteria. That could be one thing. Or maybe the rest of the market's wrong, and he's the one guy charging the right rent, and everybody else to the left of him is lower. You're only going to learn that on doing more investigation. But this is a quick way to quickly evaluate how your building fits into the market.
Derek, how often should landlords do this kind of due diligence, this kind of ranking or market survey study?
I think when you're buying a building, it's absolutely critical you do this.
Sure.
Okay, because with the prices people are paying today, at a 5 cap, every dollar of NOI is worth $20, right? So when you're buying a building and you're already stretching to make it work, you should really be knowing if there's any latent value in the rents. Now, you can't pick up that rent immediately, as Joe will talk about later, but on turnover, you can pick up those rents, right? So I think that when you first buy the building, you need to do a very comprehensive study like this. And we do this for our clients when we're brokers, not that people hire us to help them on due diligence. But I think that if you're an owner and, you have no expectation of selling, but you should always be trying to maximize your revenue, on an annual basis, you should be maybe not looking at 22 buildings, but you should be looking at your top competitors around you that are geographically close to you and in the same price range.
Right, and is it important to actually, visit a sample of suites as well?
Yeah, no, you've got to go and pretend to mystery shop it.
Okay.
Right? You've got to send someone in to go and do it. But
Sure.
even looking at this chart may not be the right answer, okay? This is just going to give you a sense as to where your rent should be, okay? If you go to the next slide, I think it'll flush it out a little bit more. Now, I think you'll go to the next one, Jim, sorry. Skip through that one. Okay, so you want to test your rent levels, okay? So there are 3 things that are going to determine if your rent is right. Number 1 is the condition of your rental unit, right? So if your rental apartment's in lousy shape, don't expect to get the market rent. But I tick that one off because you can walk in and inspect it, right? The second thing that's going to affect the rent you charge is the sales skills of your rental, of the rental agent in the apartment, okay? So you can check their sales skills by mystery shopping them. So you do a mystery shop to get a score of 90%. You tick that off. So I've got a good apartment and I've got a good rental agent. So now it comes down to closing ratio to tell you that your rent is correct. So for example, if 10 people came into your building and all 10 rented, is your price too high or too low?
Probably too low.
Probably too low. If 20 people came into your building and they were all qualified and not one rented, what's your rent? Probably too high,
Then it's
right?
too high.
So the way you can tell if your rents are right is not by how many apartments are leased every month, because if there's no traffic, your rent can still be right, but you're just not going to lease any apartments, is by looking at the closing ratio, right? So you look at so let's assume you get 100 telephone inquiries. So you got a good person on the phone, you run a fair ad, you can typically book about 60 appointments, okay? So if you book 60 appointments, typically 50 people show up. 10 people just forget or whatever, right? So if 10 people come in, then you should be able to close about 20% of the leases, or maybe 30% of the leases, right? So assuming your apartments are clean and your salesperson is good, right, then you should have a closing ratio around 20 to 30%. I chose 20 here. So if you're getting 10 rentals from 50 people walking in, right, and your apartment's clean, your salesperson's good, your rents are probably right. If your closing ratio is 50% and all those other conditions hold true, you should probably be raising your rents. If your closing ratio is 1 or 2 or 3%, well, gosh, you're really having to get so many people in to rent one apartment, your rent may be on the high side. So that's basically the metrics for measuring is your rent right. And if your building is full, that does not necessarily mean your rents are right or wrong, right? If you have a bunch of vacancies, people always think, I'll just drop the rent. No, sometimes it's the condition of the apartment or the salesperson or the marketing, right? But by looking at the closing ratio, that will tell you a lot more. And so often people say, my rental agent, my building manager is not doing a very good job. I've got all these vacancies. No, he just has no traffic. You're not doing a good job doing the marketing to get them in there, okay?
Right.
So that's pretty much, I think, what I wanted to say. Any more slides, or is that it? I think that's
No. That's it. That's great.
Great.
Thanks, Derek.
Okay.
Joe.
That's a great picture.
That's a great. I don't know. What is it? What are you doing there, Joe?
There, I'm rappelling down a 26-floor building.
Wow.
One for every year I've practiced.
And why are you doing that?
Are you?
It was to raise money. You had to raise a certain amount of money for heart and stroke. And if you raised to the threshold, then you got to rappel down the side of the building. So that's right as I'm passing my office, and somebody inside the office took a picture as I went down.
I don't know if you're smiling there, I'm assuming. And that isn't fear on your face.
No, it was a great experience. I had a camera, too, so I could take pictures as I went down, video, and it was a great time. Good time.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks for joining us, Joe. And as the slide states, Joe has been in the business for 26 years, a consummate professional, and practice residential tenancies law. So, Joe, I know you're going to talk about rent, what constitute rents, how we protect our rents, and also talk a little bit about some of the legislation as well, and then talk about rent control and what's happened since then. So, take it away.
Okay. All right. So the thing is that in Ontario, everything is controlled generally by the Residential Tenancies Act, but you do have a lot of flexibility within the Act to add additional charges as prescribed, and to basically negotiate with tenants, especially incoming tenants for the first time, because when you negotiate a new lease with a new tenant, you can set the rent at whatever the market will bear, touching on what Derek was just talking about. The thing to remember is that rent includes everything that's paid to the landlord. And so if you want a separate charge for parking, that is rent. A separate charge for locker spaces, that is rent. If you negotiate an agreement with a tenant to pay an extra charge for air conditioning, that is rent. And those are the things you should think about before you enter into the tenancy agreement. What are you going to be charging people for? And turning to air conditioning, for example, a lot of landlords have provisions in their lease that say you can't put any items in beyond the appliances that are there unless you consent, or unless you get the landlord's consent and agree to pay the extra charge. Well, a lot of landlords don't specify the extra charge. They don't address it at the outset of the tenancy, and then they come to grief when they try to charge it after the fact. And it's not so much that it's illegal for them to charge it, because it isn't. It's just that then they run into problems with their tenants. If you do it all up front, it's much easier. Same with lockers. So if we just go to the next slide, This is an example of really the industry lease. So if you could just go back to it.
Yep.
This is an excerpt from the London Property Management Tenancy Association agreement. It's licensed to FRPO, to Greater Toronto Apartment Association, and a number of other regional landlord associations. And you'll see that it provides for just the basic rent in the first column for rented premises per month. Then you can specify parking. Additional appliances. You're allowed to charge if, for example, in townhouses, you often have the fixtures for washers and dryers, but if tenants want to install them in there, you're allowed to charge separately for that and an additional amount. And typically it's got to be a, quote, reasonable amount. Very, very hard to determine other than based on experience, but you can charge those separate charges, whether it's $30, whatever. Air conditioning, if you worked it out over the year, it would probably work out to about $10 a month, or many landlords will say, well, it's $120 minimum for the AC season, June to the end of September. But if you put that right on the lease, then you avoid problems down the road. And then there's room to put lockers, any other services that you provide that are permitted under the legislation. And then you'll end up with the total. That typically will be the total amount that you put in for last month's rent. Over to the side, you'll see that there's provision for a rental incentive. Typically, those are discounts, and you can include that at the outset of a tenancy. The LPMA agreement, and really the industry lease, is interesting in this sense. The amount that you put in for basic rent has been discounted by 2%. And so if a tenant is late in paying the rent, you can take advantage, you can basically charge them a 2% late fee. And that's built in by default into the lease. You don't see it on this. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just a quick question regarding the actual tenancy agreements and the forms. If I'm a new landlord and I'm looking to find a form that's current, where would I go? Do I talk to my lawyer? Do I go to an apartment association? Where do I find something that's current that I can rely on?
Your best bet is to go to typically a regional apartment association. Most of them use this particular form of tenancy agreement, and it was updated in April of this year, so it's completely up to date. And the cost, because it's done through an association, the cost is relatively, certainly hugely reduced compared to going to a lawyer and asking them to draft it.
Sure.
It's all paid for through the industry.
Okay, and when
so you join the organization.
Okay, you join the organization.
Yeah, and just subscribe to their leases. You can get them electronically, or you can get hard copies.
Great.
And that includes rental applications, guarantee forms, sublet agreements, assignment agreements, and so on.
Okay, perfect.
So just to finish here, you'll see I've also put in an excerpt. You can charge for dishonored checks, NSF fees, and it's $20 is prescribed by statute, so you'd put the $20 in there. If you don't put it in there, then you're going to have a problem if you try to collect it later. There's room to put in a number for LMR deposit, and then just below, the administration and processing fee referred to, that's where a tenant asks you to consent to an assignment or sublet. Again, if you don't provide for this in the lease, you can't charge for it later. You're allowed to put a number in there. Most landlords will put a reasonable amount because it's really intended to cover your out-of-pocket expenses in approving a new assignee or a subtenant. Typically, that's going to be anywhere from $25 to $75. If you put $1,200 in there, you're going to run into trouble. And then there you'll see Clause 5 dealing with utilities. And these are the things that the tenant agrees to pay in addition to the rent, and typically they're paid separately. So, for example, the hot water heater in a lot of townhouse complexes, you're responsible for that on your own. Electricity through a sub-metering company or the local hydro company, you pay that on your own. Cable TV, same thing. Typically, Rogers Bell, whatever, that's paid separately. That's just to make it clear that these aren't included in those rent amounts up above. Okay, can we just go to the next slide then?
Sure, and one more quick question. A friend of mine was out looking for an apartment just a few days ago, and he was asked for a key deposit.
Yep, and that takes us to the next slide. A key deposit is an illegal charge. So you see the second bullet, that's not rent. Some landlords used to say, well, if you want drapes, it's going to cost you this much more. If you want the unit painted, it's going to cost you this much more, and they just charge a flat fee. Those are all illegal charges. Even if you were to say you have to have insurance through this specific insurer, that's an illegal demand and an illegal charge if they pay it. So that's not rent. Those are all illegal charges. Rent also doesn't include payments that you make to a third party. So if somebody defaults on the hydro, even though they said in the lease they would pay it, the default is really with the hydro company. If you have to pay the bill because they defaulted, then you have to go to small claims court. It's not rent, and the Landlord and Tenant Board has jurisdiction over recovery of rent, but not over third-party charges.
And
So,
Joe, can the
yeah.
landlord demand to be paid in, say, either cash or credit card or check?
You can. Most landlords will decline to be paid by cash because that exposes them to risk. But you can demand that they pay by certified check or pre-authorized payment or by check. What you can't do is you can't require pre-authorized payments, or you can't require that they get post-dated checks for the year. You give them the option. Most reasonable tenants will take it, and I think your best option is to give them the opportunity, because it's for post-dated checks, or even better, pre-authorized payment. There's a lot of goodwill at the outset of a tenancy. People will readily sign the document. That assures your payments come in on time, very simple. And I'm a tenant, and every year I write 12 post-dated checks, and it's a pain. I'd rather have pre-authorized payment, but my particular landlord doesn't have it. But it's a great thing to have, and most tenants will want it.
Sure.
I've already indicated you can recover rent from the Landlord and Tenant Board. Anything else, you're going to have to go elsewhere. You can charge for refundable key deposits. You can charge the NSF fees that you pay to the bank. The problem is often proving it, whether it's $5 or $7.50, but you can often get something from the bank, and that's in addition to that $20 admin charge for an NSF check. And you can charge, as I've already said, the consent or assignment costs. If you could move to the next one, Jim. Now, when we talk about protecting rent, so let's assume you've got all your rents in place. Now, what you don't want is to have risks down the road. And where we see risk typically is in areas where you are redeveloping existing properties. A lot of this is going on in Toronto right now. And your risks there are that tenants will seek an abatement because you're interfering with their reasonable enjoyment, or they will seek a rent reduction because of the loss of green space that is now being allocated for the redevelopment that's occurring on site. There are ways to avoid that liability, and for example, I've bulleted Section 37 agreements. Those are agreements you enter into with a municipality, and usually the terms of those agreements are to provide some compensation to the tenant for the loss of that amenity, the green space that's out there, and improvements to the existing property. So if tenants file these applications for rent reductions based on redevelopment and infilling, invariably you will have a Section 37 agreement in place, and the board has been directed by the courts to pay attention to those. If tenants are seeking an abatement because of all the noise associated with the construction, the dust and everything else, the inconvenience, we file the condition assessments done in order to assess the work to be done, engineering reports, the fact that the landlord has conducted all of this work professionally, and that the board takes into account in assessing whether or not the tenant should get an abatement. In the case of construction on an adjacent site, if you've severed the land in advance, then your liability decreases considerably. But if what you're doing is work on site, then you do face liability if you're working on a separate building. But if you're doing, for example, balcony repairs, major envelope work, There's a lot of inconvenience to tenants, but if you file the condition assessments, engineering reports, and so on, in the vast majority of cases, the board will not award an abatement of rent and allow the landlord to maintain their rents in place.
Sure, and I can speak, as a property manager, having worked in the business for many, many years, it just makes good business sense just to communicate to your residents, ensure that they understand what's going on, and that goes a long way. Just good old-fashioned customer service.
Well, on that vein, if you just go to the next slide, this is a notice that we used at a hearing that was given by a property management company that had good communication skills. And this is a typical notice that any landlord engaged in on-site work on existing buildings should be giving. And it contains all the elements that are necessary to protect the landlord from an abatement. So you'll see that in November of 2012, a notice was given saying, hey, we're going to be doing balcony repairs. Then they give a notice on March 5th to say we're starting mobilizing everything in a couple of days. They set out how long the work is expected to take, some of the variables that may affect the length of time. And as you work through the notice, you'll see that it communicates what the effect may be, what you as residents can expect, and then it just gives contact information. The things that are in this notice are actually contained in a regulation to the Residential Tenancies Act, and it says if you do all these things as set out as you see in this notice, then the board is prohibited from giving the tenants an abatement of rent. So very simple risk management strategies that you can use to protect your rental income while the work's going on. This is a relatively short project, but some of these balcony and window replacements, building envelope,
sure, they can go on for months.
It can go on for, in some cases, a couple of years.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice.
Okay, next slide.
Sorry.
Yeah, Surana?
No, go ahead. Joe, I actually had a question about the AC and the leases from the previous slides.
Yeah.
I come across a lot of leases where a landlord have a one-time fee that will cover 3 or 4 months in the year, and I guess it's the summer months, and they ask for, let's say, $150. However, the tenants never end up paying that amount, and so the landlord is not able to collect that at the tribunal, and so they send them to collections for that amount. Like, in your experience, have you been successful in requesting that amount as a part of a non-payment application at the tribunal?
Absolutely. What you need to present your case properly at the tribunal, but here's the mechanics of it. This is part of the agreement the tenant has entered into. They agreed to pay a separate charge or not use the AC. They've accepted and used the AC. Therefore, they are effectively in an agreement under Section 123 of the Residential Tenancies Act, which allows you to increase the rent at any time for a prescribed service. And air conditioning is prescribed in the regulations to the Act. Therefore, it's rent. So if you present your case properly, you will be successful in showing that they haven't paid the rent and that you're entitled to it. There's also a decision called Standbar Properties, which affirms the right of a landlord to enforce the terms of a lease, and that it's basically a breach of the lease and the tenant's obligations if they fail to comply with that.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on here, above guideline increases, I'm going to move through very quickly, but there are provisions in the legislation that allow you to increase the rent based on capital expenditures. There are caps on that, 3% above the guideline for a maximum of 3 years. Typically, you'll come in under that cap, but just to be aware, there is a cap. Some landlords will spread major work out in different projects over a series of years so that they don't exceed the cap and they're able to recover their capital expenditure allowance. There is no cap on the pass-through of electricity charges, utilities, and property taxes where they go up past a threshold. Now, in 2014, the guideline on rent-controlled buildings is going to be 0.8%. So you don't have to have a huge spike in those categories in order to exceed the thresholds that are set out in the legislation. And if you do incur substantial increases, you can easily pass them through on an application to the board. There are also situations, especially in Toronto, where property taxes have gone down, and the intent in the legislation is to pass those savings on to the tenant. So there's a default formula that gets triggered, and tenants get notification that they're getting a rent reduction. The thing for landlords to look at there is those calculations are done by default. They're not based on actual numbers, and often when you do the actual number, you'll find out that the tenants are getting back a lot more than the reduction that was actually imposed. So the landlord is basically losing a substantial amount, and that's coming right out of your net operating income. But it's fairly easy to apply to vary the amount of rent reduction so that you can recapture the excess and keep it in your base rents. There are also special rules that you can enter into a specific agreement en suite with an individual tenant for an above guideline increase. It's the basis of a separate agreement that you would make just with that tenant, and there's a formula for doing that. It's something to look at when you give your tenants a notice of rent increase, and they say, well, you know, I see that you want to increase the rent, but how about giving me this, or how about giving me that? Let's say it's a fridge. You say, fine, I'll give you a fridge, but I'm not going to just take a 0.8% increase. I'll give it to you if you give me a 3% increase. You're within the 3% cap, and that's acceptable. With renovation of existing units, just a caution to landlords who think that they can kick people out and fix up the unit and recharge at a brand new rent. When you implement that, the tenant has a right of first refusal to come back in at the old rent. So proceed with caution there.
Okay, that's great.
The last area I want to cover is post-November 1991 complexes. These are buildings that were not occupied for residential purposes prior to November of 1991, and they're first occupied and rented after that date. If that's the situation, they're exempt from the guideline. They're exempt from rent controls. You can still only take an increase once a year, but you can increase it by whatever really the market will bear. And it wasn't an issue 10 years ago or 15 years ago, but it is today because we've had thousands and thousands of condo units that are rented out. They're covered by the Residential Tenancies Act, and they're post-November 91 complexes. You can increase the rent by whatever the market will bear. You do have to serve a notice, and I'll show you the form in a moment. Some questions around that are, you know, should you give notice in advance that it is exempt? I think the best practice is to give notice so that tenants aren't taken by surprise when you take more than a guideline increase after 1 year. Should you build this into your business plan? Say, well, I'm going to rent out, it's a post-November 91 building, so I'm not going to charge too much rent, and then I'll try to pick it up in year 2. My answer to that is no. With a liberal NDP minority government in place, a lot of trade-offs are going on, and the post-November 91 exemption is always sort of hovering just off the radar screen. If you do have a post-November 91 building, there's a separate notice of rent increase that you serve. I've put that up on the screen. The thing you'll see is point number 1, the guideline does not apply to tenants who live in rental units that are partially exempt, and a post-November 91 building is partially exempt. That's all I had wanted to cover.
Well, that's great. Great information. Thank you very much. Surana Baptiste, manager at Suite Collections Canada. That's a wonderful photograph of you.
That was 2010, I believe, in our summer picnic at Wonderland.
Ah, very well. Looks like you're having a great time. So you're going to talk to us.
I wasn't on any rides then.
Maybe that's why you're smiling.
Exactly. We just finished having lunch at that time. So.
Yeah, probably not a good thing to do is go on a roller coaster right after lunch. So, Surana, you're going to talk about the collection process, the application process, and also talk a little bit about landlords' expectations when they use a service such as yours. So, let's go.
Okay, so Sweet Collections is a collection agency, and we specialize in residential bad debt collections, and we service landlords for tenants that are currently living in the unit and once they're vacated. So it's a one-stop shop for us. Rent collections, current and past tenants. So we first look at what landlords need to do at the application stage. And I usually like to call it the honeymoon stage. And we often try to get tenants or landlords to get all the information that they will need if the tenant should end up in collections that will help or aid to a successful collection of that account. So emergency contacts, and I said the moms are the best, and the reason for that is often if you default on any payment, Rogers, whatever the case may be, and the collection agency calls and your mom picks up the phone and there's an important call, the moms are usually very dramatic about that, and they will be like, don't forget to call, so you know that the debtor will get that call and the mom will be on them to call back. And so that's often a good way for us to get a hold of the debtors. Collections, start the collection process within the first 5 days of the tenant not paying the rent, and that's when the tenant is currently living in the unit. A lot of landlords will tell me that, oh, I like to give a grace period of 10 days, or I'm working with a tenant, I'm giving them a payment plan. What happens, it takes about 3 to 4 months to get a non-paying tenant evicted through the tribunal process. So if you wait give the tenant an extra 10 or so days, by the time you serve them the N4 and go through that entire process, if the monthly rent is $1,000, you're looking at $3,000 to $4,000 in arrears if the tenant makes no payments before you send that tenant to collection. So your goal should always be to get the tenant out as soon as possible.
So
the way to do that is to start the process right away.
Sure. So clearly, if you are going to broker some sort of a payment plan, you've got to exercise some really good judgment, really know the circumstances of your tenant before you do something with that, because you, as you had stated, are wasting precious time and money.
Absolutely, and I don't even usually recommend payment plan outside of the tribunal just because there's no recourse for the landlord in the event that the tenant breaches.
Okay.
So if you want a payment plan, then do it at the
Go
tribunal.
through the tribunal.
In the event they breaches, you have a recourse to get an order.
Sure.
So for past tenant collections, it's very unique, and because they come with no forwarding addresses. Every single account that is assigned to us is a skip account, and so it's very difficult for you to locate the debtor. We tend to always encourage a landlord to send their collection files to a collection agency, just because the collection agency, they have a lot more resources to be able to locate the debtors. They can report the bad debt to the credit reporting agency, which will alert future landlord that there is an issue with his tenant when they're going to rent the unit. So it helps all the landlords by having them report their debt to the credit reporting agency. There's no emotional attachment. There's a lot of times that landlord, they develop this relationship with a tenant, especially the mom and pop, where they feel sorry, they don't want to go out. The tenant tell them their entire life story, and so they feel bad. With an agency involved, there's no emotional attachment. We will get the money that is outstanding to you through, of course, the regulations that is in place for us to do so. And it also protects your reputation. At the tribunal or at the collection agency going after a tenant, if you go as a landlord yourself, like your reputation is on the line, because these debtors, they're very smart and they're very quick to report you to the Consumer Protection or Better Business Bureau, and it's not a good thing for you to have all these reports, whereas at an agency, we don't have a problem taking that on and defending it on your behalf.
So it makes good business sense to go through an agency.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some of the services that we offer, we prepare and serve landlord termination notices and application. We proceed with the eviction of the non-paying tenant if it leads to that. We do code attendances, the LTB and small claims court, and of course the past tenant collections. One thing that I would like to talk about with respect to the expectation of landlords sending a file to collection, it's not an overnight process, especially if a tenant was evicted for non-payment of rent. Like the view that the collection agency can get the money in a couple months or in a month's time, it's not realistic and reasonable. We usually allow the tenants or the debtors at that point to get themselves back into the market, get themselves have a new job. Maybe they had a certain death event in their family, divorce, what the case may be, and that usually requires a couple months, if not sometimes years, for the tenant to be in a position to pay the debt. So patience is a big one. The good thing is we continue to report every single month for 6 years. It stays on the credit report. So often we don't even contact them. They're trying to get a car. They're trying to get some type of credit. They contact us to get it resolved. So patience is a big thing. If they're out there, they're employed, we will get the money and to have the matter, the case resolved. That's pretty much all I have to say, yeah.
Well, and it's very important stuff to say, so thank you very much. And just to reiterate to those that are listening, if you are going down this road, it makes a really good business sense to go through an agency such as Sweet Collections, and we've got Surana's contact information there. Well, thank you once again to our guests. Great information. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Joe. We've got Joe's contact information on the screen there. Partner with Cohen Highly, and his phone number, email. So please, for those who are listening, feel free to contact either Joe or Surana, and obviously Derek. So thank you very much, my guests. Enjoy the rest of the day.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Well, to those who are listening, I just want to thank you once again for joining us. You know, we really appreciate your feedback. Please visit our website often at rockaptadvisors.ca. What we've got up on the screen there are some upcoming webinars, and we hope that you join us for some of those. As well, if you are a broker, we are always looking for good quality brokers for co-brokerage opportunities. We'd love to partner with you. We've got some great information on our websites. Derek has a couple of videos that he talks about co-brokerage, so I encourage you to look at those. And also, please do contact us. There's Daryl McCullough, who's our broker of record, to talk about co-brokerage. And thanks once again to RealTrack for the following sales information. So what do we have here? 256 sales, so, you know, busy year. Largest transaction last month on Darcel Avenue, $30 million. Not a lot of surprises over here. So 64% of the transactions happening in the GTA. Let's just get right into some of the meat of the sales. So this one here, 500 Gilbert Avenue, Eglinton Avenue in Caledonia. Looks like, well, it's $75,000. So
looks like a pretty good deal these days, Jim. We see so many transactions over $100,000 now for buildings like that.
Yeah, quite frankly, I was surprised to see this this number, Derek. Okay, Westwood Abbey. Now, this sounds familiar, Derek. I think you lived on this street,
this
right?
is my stomping ground. You know, I grew up on Darcel Avenue, and I actually think my sister, when she was like 19 or 20 or something, moved into this building. So, you know, you've got kind of a pretty working-class neighborhood here. The building is very close to the Westwood Mall, where the Mississauga bus system comes into, and things like that. So $137,000 is a pretty good number for, you know, for basically townhouse style product. I think I recall that this is concrete product, and probably a very working class demographic. And you know, maybe one day this could be sort of, you know, condo titled and sold off if that were allowed. It's that type of product.
Sure. Next one here, Herb Street, $111,000. So again, you know, as you were saying, small buildings are are getting a large price and probably a non-cap rate deal on this one. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jim. This is 18 units at $111,000, which a long time ago got you, well, not so long, got you a pretty good building in Toronto, right?
Sure.
You know, a high-rise, if you look down at the rents, it's $750 and I think $865 per unit. Yeah, people are, you know, smaller buildings aren't necessarily being bought for yield. They're buying because people want to put their money into apartments.
You bet. Here, Ottawa, this looks so King Edward and Rideau, so this is a very good area, an up-and-comer.
It's a decent area. I think it's around the university, the University of Ottawa, and you know rents are $925. But gosh, look at that rent of $100 and you know, or that price of $148,000, almost $150,000 for essentially a square box building. But there's probably some good upside potential in in buildings like this.
Sure. Okay, 147 Singleton, Belleville. So what this says to me is there's some good value to be had in the smaller towns.
Yeah. I mean, if you were to rebuild this building today, it'd be cost you well over $100,000.
Wow, yeah, $52,000 per unit,
right.
absolutely.
So $52,000, right.
And that brings us to the end of some of the sales that have been going on. Once again, I encourage you to visit our website for our upcoming webinars. You know, we thank you so very, very much for joining us, and once again, please check out our website. We're always looking for brokers that we can co-broker with, and if there are any other services or expert advice, we would love to be your trusted advisor. Thank you very much. Enjoy the day. Keep cool. Take care, and bye-bye.
Okay, thank you, Jim.